Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open, a podcast featuring conversations with artists, writers, and curators. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 43. Today's guest is Susan Rosenberg Jones. Something I've been thinking about a bit lately is empathy. Or, I guess I shouldn't say lately. This is something I think about a lot and have been thinking about for a long time, empathy. The ability to understand or maybe even feel another person's feelings or experiences. So why have I been thinking about this in particular right now, so that I'd want to talk about it right now? Well, part of it has to do with today's guest, Susan Rosenberg Jones, whose work I find very empathetic. Same thing actually for my last guest, Jess T. Dugan. Both of them have a way of making portraits that do a lot to humanize their subjects, give us a way in, a way to connect with people who maybe we might not otherwise cross paths with in our own lives. And that's pretty amazing and valuable. But I've been thinking about the flip side of it too, and that's when there's a lack of empathy. I think that a lot of the discourse these days suffers from a lack of empathy, especially towards marginalized people, people of color, women, LGBTQ people, poor people, disabled people. There's a pretty profound lack of empathy for experiences that aren't part of the empowered mainstream. But as upsetting as it is to me when it's coming from, say, a politician, what really confounds me is when it's coming from an artist. Because, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you've heard me say this a lot, but art is about communication. It's the deepest and most direct way that we get of accessing someone else's experience, whether that's literature or visual arts or performance or whatever. So really, art is about empathy. It's an empathetic medium. Being an artist, or at least how I understand it, it's about digging deep. It's about expression, about understanding, reaching out. So when I see some artist or writer, and this does happen, when I see someone whose job it is to explore and to understand and connect, just refusing to see the humanity in another person, it's not just upsetting, it's bewildering. It just doesn't compute for me. And I wonder how it happens that someone can have a desire to put something beautiful into the world, but isn't willing to connect with other people in some basic way. I wonder why, and how it is that those limitations and walls get there. I don't really know, but it's what's been on my mind lately. So as I mentioned, today's guest is photographer Susan Rosenberg Jones. I've been following Susan's work for several years now, starting with her series Second Time Around, which is about her experience of being a newlywed in her 60s, and then also her series Building 1, which is about the community in her apartment building, which was previously subsidized middle-income housing, but has undergone a lot of changes over the past 10 years. We talked about both of those, and I put links to both in the show notes, so do take a look. If you'd like to see some more of Susan's work, she has work in a group exhibition, the Soho Photo National Photography Competition exhibition at the Soho Photo Gallery in New York. That show opens Thursday, July 6th. That's tomorrow if you're listening the day that this episode is released, with a reception from 6 to 8 p.m. I put a link in the show notes for that. So if you're in the New York City area, please stop in and have a look. Okay, so let's jump in, shall we? If you'd like to tweet your comments as you listen, use the hashtag ChannelOpenPod on Twitter and join in the conversation there. And now, here's my conversation with Susan Rosenberg Jones.
I have a Fitbit, so it tells me how I slept, which is sort of weird. It's good and bad, because sometimes I think I had a great night's sleep, and then I look at my, stats, and you had a lot of awake times and a lot of light sleeping. And so maybe it wasn't so good, But I'm actually okay because I've had this issue with this sort of artist block, I guess. Like I have this new project that I'm telling everybody that I'm starting, and I've even asked people to photograph them, and they've agreed, and I just can't get to do it. Yeah, and so I've been obsessing over. I'm even put on Facebook about recording, and doing like some kind of, not audio necessarily, but at least some kind of transcript to go with the photos. And, but that somehow, I guess it didn't feel right to me. And I went to a film the other day, which was really good, by the way. It's called Obit. It's about obituary writers. It's a documentary, people at the New York Times, which, I love obituaries. They're just like little biographies. And we went to the film, and then afterwards we had coffee, and I said, well, I'm, trying to do this. I'm planning my next photo project. I'm trying to flesh it out before I actually start, and trying to figure out how to do it, And she said, what it's about? I said, it's widows and widowers. And she said, well, she's not a photographer. And she said, well, why would a picture of a widow or widower, how could you know that they were that? Or what would it say? I mean, that it wasn't just a regular photo of a person. Mm-hmm. And so just like kind of out of the mouths of babes kind of thing, I was thinking, well, yeah, exactly. Like, I shouldn't have to use words, it's like, how can I get that intimate feeling in the photo, that says it? So that made me feel better, and I'm ready to start,
Okay. Well, that's great.
So I know it sounds a little, and also I pushed myself through, but I've had this like block, and I figured, the best way to do that, what's worked for me before, is just take my camera, even though it's heavy, walk around with it during my day-to-day stuff, and just photograph, not with the phone. Somehow with the camera, it's, it's a different level of, I don't know, I just love my camera. I love using it. So the phone is good on the fly, but I like using the camera. So I've been walking around and just photographing things that pique my visual interest. And honestly, that's helped. That's helped. Now I feel good. I feel really good today because I all weekend, I just took my camera around during the week, this week. I just schlepped it everywhere and just photographed what, I don't know, I kind of sparked myself back.
Yeah, it's funny how like lately I find myself mostly taking pictures with my phone. Mm-hmm. Even though I carry an actual camera around almost everywhere I go, but I just don't actually take it out. And it is funny how you'd think that it's just a tool and you're still you, and whatever catches your eye. But I feel like when you've actually got the camera out, like the real camera out in your hand, and you're walking around with it, there's something about that just changes your mindset a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I love using my phone, but when I have the camera around, there's a special feeling with that.
Yeah. And then, hearing you talk about having a block, that I'm always really interested to hear about other people's processes and sort of what they're going through creatively. I always have the hardest time sort of shooting to a concept, like having an idea beforehand and then going and making the work. It's almost always been the case that if I've been able to do something that I've already been shooting, and then I realize that I could do something with it. So yeah,
I totally get it, because I sort of operate on both levels. I have this concept of this widower thing, and now I know I'm going to go to trying to make some intimate portraits. But then there's this other part of me that just sees things and, photographs and things that really appeal to me, and there might be a thread that eventually will happen through that. Like, just photograph what is exciting to me, whether it's part of a preconceived idea or not. Just do it, and then sometimes they're just single photos, and other times they're groups. I try to stay open to both of those thoughts.
So the first body of work of yours that I was familiar with was when I saw your Second Time Around series on Lens Scratch, which is a few years ago, I think. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, it was 2015. I think she put it up in late August.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Eileen's so great. She's
she's the best.
Yeah.
She's so easy to talk to, and she's such a wonderful promoter of photography. She's so generous.
Yeah. Yeah. She is always just out there. I mean, I don't know anybody who's busier than her, so.
Right. Right.
But this series, I guess sort of the segue I was just thinking of was, so these are photographs of your husband, and they're all very sort of intimate, drawn from life, or at least they appear to be. And I was sort of wondering, whether that series sort of came about, like whether you started shooting it because you had an idea, or whether you just started shooting it and then it grew out of just what you were already taking pictures of.
A little bit of both. I took a class with Jen Davis at ICP. It was called The Intimate Portrait. And everybody was supposed to focus on something or somebody to shoot. And I guess somebody could, I guess you could do single intimate portraits of different people, or you could do self-portraits. A lot of people did that. Actually, most of them did that. But I had already started, I think, photographing Joel. And when I brought the photos in, the first or second class, they were like, oh, we want to see more, we want to see more. And then it kind of grew into that at the second time around. I just kept doing it, and I just enjoyed the process so much that I kept shooting.
Yeah. I mean, what really caught my eye about this series, well, actually, I mean, there's a bunch of things that I think really connected with me. But just in general, I'm always so interested in people who take photographs of their own sort of family, whatever that means. Because I feel like when you're photographing from your life, and when you're photographing from these intimate relationships, that you have a level of access and a level of sort of knowledge of the subjects that that is often very difficult, if maybe impossible, to have with any other type of photography.
Right.
And these pictures are, they're very intimate, and I don't know. I really appreciate people. I always feel like it's such a generous thing for when people are willing to make art from their lives. I don't know.
Yeah. I love to look at other photography. I mean, I love photography like that. I love books like that too. Even fiction, but that a lot of it's probably from the writer's own life that gets really deep into the feelings. I love having the access and just sort of shooting my feelings about someone.
Yeah. I mean, and your feelings are definitely apparent. I mean, and that's the other thing that sort of on a lot of levels, when, so all of the photographs are of Joel, but you're very present in the photographs. A lot of them feel very playful, or, very, like some of them are kind of funny even, but I think one of the things that I really like about it is that they don't really play to the sort of standard newlywed narrative. That even though there's something like kind of, and I don't mean this in like a condescending way, but there's something kind of cute about it, right? That they're also kind of subversive in a way, because like we're so used to thinking of newlyweds as being, 20 years old or whatever, and of seeing the sort of first blush of romance as being a youthful thing,
right?
And these are providing a different narrative, and I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, well, that's what made me start to do this. Because I found it fascinating too, even though I was living it. I was like, wow, I have all this excitement. We have this, this excitement about, this newlywed, in love feeling. But we're older, and we have a lot of sags and bags and baggage, and yet we have that excitement about our relationship. And I just found it just so fascinating to have these feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, and those feelings they're just very apparent in the photographs. They're so sort of tender and loving, even when they're a little, cheeky. And the other thing too that I really that grabbed my attention is, and this is, I think, especially I think this is the one that you sort of use as the cover image, kind of, where it's of him in the shower, sort of holding the shower curtain up.
Yeah, that kind of what me worry look, like Alfred E. Newman. Yeah,
but and he's in various states of undress in many of the photographs. And there's something that's very playful about that, but also I feel like a lot of these photographs would sort of more stereotypically be the kind of photographs that you'd see of a man taking a picture of his wife rather than the other way around. And there's something really fascinating to me about that also,
Yeah.
That like having a male subject, having it's sort of the inversion of the male gaze. Like that's
right. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I really like it. I really think there's also, I remember, there was a woman, oh gosh, I can't remember her name. I think her name was Kate Hutchinson, maybe something like that, who took a series of portraits of her boyfriend, then fiance, then husband, and hers were all very purposefully trying to sort of take those tropes, those portrait tropes, and sort of flip the gender on them to make a point. And though, it didn't feel like you were doing that on purpose exactly, but it still sort of did that.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just really like it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So in your artist statement, on your, in the bio on your website, let me just grab it real quick just so I get the words exactly right.
Yeah, I have to fix that website.
My work centers on home and community. What does it mean to be home, and to whom do we feel connected? And that is really resonant for me. I think that is something that is one of the most sort of profound questions of anybody's life. And so finding people that work in that space is another thing that always often resonates with me.
Yeah, with me too. I tend to befriend other photographers who work in that space as well, just because we're kindred spirits that way. And I love your work. And,
thank you.
I love it. It's just so personal and it's so tender. No, I love that. And it's just because, and you're a dad, it's like sort of another kind of reversal. It's just so pleasurable to see.
Well, thank you. I didn't really, talk to you, schedule an appointment to talk to you so that we could talk about me.
Yeah, but we've never really talked, so I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you.
I've loved it for a while, a long time.
Thank you.
And yeah, so no, it's true. But I've become friends with Andy Schreiber.
Oh, she's so great.
She's great, and Jennifer McClure, who do very personal work.
Oh, yeah.
Just loves personal work like that.
Yeah. It's interesting, I think, thinking about those two women, how, they are also working around home and community, but their photographs are so different from each other.
Right.
I just love seeing the different ways that people can take such a big sort of everyday common theme and wind up in such different places.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And one thing I try to stick to, whenever I think of, I don't know, but I start to, certain things interest me. Like if I read an article in the paper about, there was one the other day about these older couples who decided, who don't get married, but they live together, and the kids are kind of shocked, and that kind of thing. And I said, oh, that might be interesting. And then I've read maybe a year ago there was an article about these older people who, especially in New York City, rent is high. They can't afford, so they do roommate situations, but they're like 60s and 70s, And I thought, wow, that might be interesting. But then I pulled back and I say, no, you've got to stick with really personal. Like that would be an interesting maybe for somebody else to shoot. Or maybe it would be interesting for me, but I think I get in trouble when I don't stick to my feelings, very close feelings.
Well, there's an interesting little segue there because, in sort of finding out more about you after that Lens Scratch feature, I sort of, stumbled on your website and like, so you've got this other series that is sort of similar in some ways to some of those ideas about, community and, rent and stuff like that. This Building One series of yours. So, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, from you.
Yeah, well, I've been living here because it's my building. I've been living here since 1984, and it was a middle-income housing complex. I guess Tribeca was sort of a wasteland at some point, and people weren't moving here, but these buildings were built in 1974, and they weren't getting people moving here because there was no supermarket, dry cleaners, that kind of thing. I mean, there were some artists living in the lots at the time, and hindsight, I should have, jumped on that, but did not. And we moved in 84 when it was you had to have a middle income. You had to be designated within a higher or within a category. So a lot of teachers and nurses and artists and middle income people moved in because they had made an agreement. I guess the owner at the time had gotten a contract with the state. It was called Mitchell Lama. I guess they were these two people, Mitchell and Lama, who did this, and it was a good thing to keep middle income people in the city because you need that balance. You can't just have rich and poor. I mean, so in New York City that's hard, especially in Manhattan. So it was just a great place to be. It was a great place for my daughter to grow up. And then the surrounding neighborhood, Tribeca, got very, very high end. Like, first the restaurants came, Robert De Niro, and, it just became a different kind of neighborhood. And in 2004, I guess the contract had ended. And I guess it could have been extended, but there was someone who bought the buildings, and he took it out of that Mitchell Lama designation, and now they're considered luxury high rentals. So, a lot of people were kind of kicked out, on technicalities. They were subletting or whatever, And then we actually had an attorney in our building and another one in one of the other buildings, and we have a really great tenants association. Everybody got together, and we, the rest of us, original tenants or early tenants before 2004, were able to stay in our apartments, and we have contracts that say even if somebody else buys the building, we're going to keep our rent. It may go up just a little bit, but that's it. So, like across the hall from me, a family that had been there for years just moved out, and they went and they bought an apartment upstate. So the landlord, gutted the apartment, made a 2-bedroom into a 3-bedroom, put a really nice kitchen in, an extra bathroom, all the wine coolers and, the whole thing. And they're charging $8,500.
Wow.
I know. So that's what's happening in our building. So, I started to, really feel so much appreciation. I started to, even before I thought of it as this project, I was asking my neighbors to photograph them. I just find it so interesting. Like when my daughter was little and it was Halloween, we used to get the bags, the trick-or-treat bags, and her friends would come over, and we'd run, up and down the halls, and just not, the kids would ring on their doorbells, and while they were ringing, I would, look in, and you see the same line, the H line, and you go on every floor, and everybody decorates so differently, and, some people are really cluttered. I just love to look, to see how people do at these apartments, So I started to ask my neighbors on my floor if I could photograph them and in their apartments. And it was really fun because they're people I'd known for years. On the floor, maybe a little more, but even in the building, just by up and down on the elevator. We live on the 39th floor. So going up and down on the elevators, just running and saying hello to people, watching their kids grow up. And it just was fun to go into different people's apartments and talk about their stuff and photograph them in their homes and talk about how the building has changed, how the neighborhood has changed. So it developed into this series. And I think when I keep it personal, it's better, because it's my home and my community. Yeah, it does say something about gentrification and, cities and trying to keep the balance and how important it is to have a middle-income community in wherever,
Yeah.
So, because then we get into big trouble.
Yeah.
It's like you see what happens with, the Cheeto, and he would just eradicate the middle class probably and just keep the poor down and whatever. I'm going to get into that, but it's like, I think it's really important to have this socioeconomic diversity.
Yeah.
In our communities. It makes a community. If these people, it's the only diversity in our neighborhood now is our buildings. It's, and I like all the new people too. I see them at the gym and they're just people. But people in my buildings really have a special, it grounds the neighborhood in a good way.
Yeah. It's so interesting because, I've lived in California my whole life and mostly not in big cities. I live in San Diego now, which is technically a city, but people from New York or San Francisco don't usually tend to see the way that we live as very urban, which makes sense. But it's definitely a different sort of lifestyle that I've been sort of used to. I think it's really interesting to sort of get a glimpse into the ways that the communities that I'm used to are different, but also similar to the kinds of communities that you're photographing. Because I'm like you're saying, this issue of gentrification and of class sort of stuff it's everywhere. It's definitely here in San Diego. It's a huge issue. I used to live closer to more northern, and we sort of, I wasn't near San Francisco, but we went there a lot. And it's a huge issue in San Francisco. And it's like, these things are just everywhere. They're part of everybody's life now, these conversations.
Yes.
And I don't know, there's something too about where I grew up, it was a pretty sort of rural kind of area, but, or I don't know if rural is exactly right, because it's not like there were farms, but, it was a pretty small town in the woods, and so, I was used to thinking about communities in those terms.
Yeah.
And hearing you talk about your building, just your floor, it's really the same thing, just in a smaller space.
It is. It's funny, Mike, but I actually had a little show of this work in September at a gallery in Pennsylvania, Scranton, Pennsylvania. The little town where our former vice president's from. Joe Biden's from there, and it's a photography gallery, and I was a little bit reticent, nobody who's going to see this thing, and it's all the effort because I printed everything and myself, and I try to keep the price down, and I tried new paper, and I was like, oh God, I had a deadline, but it all came out just great, and a lot of people came, and they were local, like universities, colleges, and the libraries. People like photo editors. I don't know. It was a nice mix of people who came to see it, and a lot of them were from that area or lived in that area for a long time. And they were. I said, "Wow, it's just like so interesting to look at people who live in these like apartments. Like, I live on a farm, and I have so much space, and to see these people in these little boxes and how they make a home." And so it was fun to see like that perspective. Mm-hmm. That had nothing to do with, they really weren't thinking about the diversity at all. They were just thinking about how people actually make full out homes in these small spaces and live a whole life and raise kids in the apartments and, So I enjoyed that.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, it's really the kinds of things like that you're talking about and that you see in the photographs, like the neighborhood that I live in now it was actually really interesting to hear you talking about how in Tribeca there wasn't sort of a residential infrastructure. Mm-hmm. The neighborhood that I live in, San Diego, was actually sort of notorious for that, that it was developed really quickly. And what's the name of the neighborhood? It's called Mira Mesa.
Okay.
And it's very close to the Miramar Air Base. So originally it was a lot of military families. And since then it's become the sort of majority Asian neighborhood in San Diego. Mm-hmm. Mostly sort of Vietnamese and Filipino families here. But what's really interesting is, I moved here, and this neighborhood has a certain reputation for being whatever it is. It's not necessarily the greatest reputation. We're undergoing a lot of changes as well as people realize that it's like a pretty convenient neighborhood where the home prices are fairly low still.
Yeah.
But when we moved in here, I didn't really know that much about the neighborhood. As I've come to learn more about the history of the neighborhood, I discovered that that it was developed extremely quickly, without really much of a plan. And when it was first developed in the 70s, there were no schools, there were no grocery stores, there wasn't a post office, there was like just a giant sea of new developed houses.
Yeah.
And actually the guy who became our mayor, Pete Wilson, at the time, ran on a platform of no more Mira Mesas. And then he went on to become governor of California, and there's a lot of people who have very strong feelings one way or the other about that guy. But it was just really interesting to hear you talk about how the changes in the neighborhood you've seen in basically the same time frame.
Yes.
Because they're sort of mirrored here. It's just that it's, instead of being one triangle of New York, it's like we're spread out over a bigger area, and instead of being one building where you have a community there, we have like the same amount of people spread out over a whole neighborhood.
Right.
But it's the same story, really.
Yeah, it is. It is the same story.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So I guess you have stores now, and
yeah, we do. Yeah.
Dry cleaners. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, no, it's happening a lot. I mean, I remember at Photo Lucida when I showed the series along with second time around, somebody from Germany said that it's happening in Berlin. Mm-hmm. I mean, neighborhoods change, real estate turns over. But I love that when there's neighborhoods, it's sort of really interesting when neighborhoods that weren't residential at all become residential.
Yeah. Yeah. And, when I look at these photographs, the thing that really jumps out at me is, is not so much that, like, I mean, I guess the thing about, people living in smaller spaces occurred to me, but really the main thing that occurred to me was just that, like, these are people who are in their homes, that you're photographing people in their own spaces, and like whatever that means, like whatever space you inhabit, like home is still home, and people have a connection to that.
Right.
That was what I really felt looking at these pictures.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, because that was my intent, really, is to show that how people like create their nests in this building, you know, in their apartment, and they've lived here for a long time. And you know, it's also, there are so many, a lot of the new people in our, and you know, it's actually a 3-building complex. It's huge. It's probably the whole Independence Plaza, it's called. It's probably as big as your town.
Yeah.
But a lot of the newer people are transient. They're transient. They don't look at a rental apartment as something that they're going to be in. They're not going to, you know, be here for years, raise their families, etc. They're just, you know, this is like a stop on the way to something else. And when we all moved in, we were setting down roots. There's still, I think, 75% of the housing in New York City is rental, and which is unlike any place else, I think.
Yeah.
But so that's interesting in itself. But that these people created their nests and, you know, made their homes, and this is where they are, and it's a rental, so they can't really do over the kitchen, or they can't make big changes. So when you go into these apartments, a lot of them have the same floors, and you see similarities in the kitchens and all that.
Yeah, that really stuck out at me too, is how the environments were similar to each other, but then still very personalized because of people's furniture or their little knickknacks or whatever. So that you have that, really, to me, sort of reinforced the sense of making a community, because you have lots of different kinds of people. You have people of different races. You have people who are different ages. Like there's some people that looked very young, some people that looked older, and then in each photograph, you're photographing inside people's own spaces, so they have a lot of personal touches to those spaces, but the bones of the structure are the same in most of the photographs. I thought that was really interesting. It really ties it together, you know? Right.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, occasionally I would go into an apartment where somebody had really gone rogue and just, you know, like there's this woman sitting on a bed, and you can see their head, she had like French doors. Well, we don't have French doors in our apartments, but her husband, he's a painter, and for, you know, to pay the bills, he works as a contractor, and so he just took out a wall, put in, you know, I mean, it's a rental. It's so funny. I mean, he put in French doors, you know, and then what did he do? He did this other thing around the door to the kitchen. He put this like wood, rustic kind of like archway, you know. I mean, he took it and he just sort of did what he wanted.
Yeah, that picture in particular did stick out to me because and there was a couple other ones where like somebody had like painted the walls a really different color. Really stood out. Yeah, because you notice that when you're looking at these in series, like the differences really pop out at you.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true. Yeah, and that's what you say. If somebody's putting in French doors, like they're planning on this is their life in this, because you know, if you move out, you're going to get in trouble with the landlord for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So we should probably take a quick break and do the second segment. So why don't we do that? Okay. So for the second segment, I always ask my guests to bring a topic of their own, and it can be whatever you want, whatever's on your mind. So what would you like to talk about today?
All right. Well, this morning on Facebook, I saw there was an article that people were posting. I think they posted it on Flack Photo, maybe. This guy, Neal Rantoul, I didn't get... What? Why are you laughing?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, well, he wrote an article on PetaPixel. You know,
this
and
was
he
last
says...
summer, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. He said he'll be 70 in a few months, and when I see that, I'm always relating, because I'm going to be 66 this summer. So, he says that he's, noting a disturbing trend in photography, and most of what he was saying in this article was that it seems like there's more photography than because of all the digital changes that have happened and the social media. There's more photography than ever, but that he feels like there's a lot of bad pictures out there, which you could say that's just editing. People don't know how to edit, or they don't want to. You see everything. But he was saying that a lot of the photos he looks at now, currently, that people are producing, you really need text to explain it. And in the old days, when we used to, look at photographs, you go to a gallery or a museum and you look at photographs, it's just a photo itself. It's worth 1,000 words. I mean, you just like, that's the whole process of photographing something and putting it on, paper or even online is to say something with that photograph. You're making a visual statement. It might be a little bit emotional. It's graphically interesting. I think that was the way that we always kind of looked at it, but now people are just taking it, looking at it differently, and he feels like it's diluting. He just is noting the change. So, I wonder what you thought about that.
Well, I didn't mean to laugh. The reason I laughed, actually, I was just having a conversation about that article with a friend of mine yesterday.
Oh, how funny!
And the reason that I laughed is actually that article. I actually wrote a rebuttal to that article, and it was published on PetaPixel a week after Neal's was.
This is so funny how this happens. I mean, this was on today, and of course I should have checked because everybody's commenting on it on Facebook. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Fake news. That's what it is.
I think it's still it's definitely a relevant. It's no less relevant now than it was last summer.
Right.
So and Neal and I actually he reached out to me after my my piece got published, and we had a sort of brief conversation that was very genial. And he was a good sport about it, about me having written what I wrote. I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, gosh, I think I wrote something like 1,500 words.
Wow, I'm gonna have to look for that.
Yeah,
it's true. I saw that they said so many 346 comments. I said, wow, they fired people up so much today.
People are very onto it.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna have to read that. But okay, go ahead.
No, I think that his point about things changing is absolutely true. I think that there are big differences in how the medium is used and how it's approached today. I thought one of the things about his piece, I thought this was both in the piece and then we talked about it a little bit afterwards, just the two of us, that for him it wasn't just the fact that the photographs are sort of built with an artist statement in mind, but also that in his opinion a lot of the photographs don't live up to their statements. Which I thought was interesting too. For me, I think probably the reason that I felt motivated to respond to that, to his essay, is because it does strike a little close to home for me as someone who tries very hard to effectively combine images and text. But I would actually say that I think that it's very difficult to do that. It's certainly been difficult for me, and that I would agree with him that most of the sort of MFA type projects that you see a lot of these young photographers coming out with don't really do that in a way that is very cohesive.
Right.
Where it's not for me, what I always like to see is where the text is doing one thing and the images are doing something else. And so there's no way that you could have the fullness, the whole thing together, couldn't exist without both pieces holding up their end, which is not the kind of thing that he's talking about.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Because I love photos and text together. I love it. I mean, but the photos still should stand alone for me, or, at least, like, I look at your work, your photos are beautiful, whether, the text enhances it, of course, but you still like to, I don't know, I feel like they should still, the text supports the photos, or the photos support the text, but, and I love that in concert thing. I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but,
yeah, I think the main sort of thrust of my argument in the piece that I wrote was just that I think that it's not a completely fair comparison to be talking about, because most of the people that he referenced in his essay were, sort of people that we recognize as masters of the genre from previous decades, people like, Robert Frank or, whatever. And obviously, like, if you look at the Americans now, right, like it's still a seminal piece. It's still an amazing, I guess I didn't get to see the exhibition, obviously, but, I've seen the book. I own the book. It's pretty amazing still, and there's no text in it.
Right.
It's not a completely fair comparison, I don't think, to say, like, look at what's coming out of MFA programs right now versus here is, like, the pinnacle of sort of street photojournalistic stuff, like from this groundbreaker from 50 years ago. It's not,
Yeah. Oh, I totally see it. And as I was reading it, I thought that too, that change is good, for sure. And there's a lot of contemporary photographers working who are, more old school but still new, and do different things. And I don't know. There's people still working in that way, that the Cartier-Bresson and the Robert Frank way, like David Carroll comes to mind. Just slices of life kind of stuff.
Yeah. Even Daryl David's not super young.
Oh, exactly. But exactly. But he's an active photographer now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just, I don't know if it's Instagram or what has pushed this forward, or these MFA programs. But I think the photographers coming in, those young photographers are being influenced a lot by the social media and the, even on Instagram. There are so many captions people put on their photos, and I was like, oh, will you stop it? I can look at the photo. I don't need all that.
Yeah.
Explanation. It's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and obviously there's a big difference between, even on Instagram, there's people that are using it in lots of different ways.
There's snapshots, and then there's serious people, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I brought up in my piece was just that that I had taken the opportunity to do a little bit of research, just sort of based on some hunches and some sort of conversations that I'd had, and I went through and I looked back at sort of the history of art criticism around when we, like, particularly looking at periods when styles and genres were rapidly changing. And that at every major sort of turning point, like transitional period between major art movements, there were definitely critical voices who were very skeptical about it. And the kinds of things that Neal says in his piece were very reminiscent of the kinds of things that, like, in the 80s, I can't remember the guy's name, but I put it in the piece. There was a guy who used to go on and on and on about how stupid Andy Warhol was. And then, like in the 40s, and there was a particular guy who wrote for a major newspaper, and he would just go on and on about how abstract expressionism and modernism were completely stupid and empty, and nobody should be paying any attention to it because it was. And, even going back to, like, the Impressionists, like when the Impressionists were first starting, there were, one of the major Paris art critics was talking about how these impressionists are just like terrible painters who have no idea, like they have no technique and they don't know what they're doing, and this is like, it's stupid, and why are we even paying attention to it? I just thought that was a really, there's a lot of resonance between that and how some people talk about sort of conceptual style photography that's really in vogue right now.
Yes.
And I think that, whether or not we ultimately decide that the thing that's popular now, at least popular with like the, Chelsea photo galleries, whether or not that ends up being something with legs and that we decide, 30 or 40 years from now is still valuable.
Yeah.
Like, I think that it's true that we are in a transitional period right now. And I do think that digital has contributed to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I also
think it's contributed a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm talking an awful lot right now.
No, but that's so interesting. No, it's true. And I also see the history, and I think part of what I like this article, because I'm older too, and I sort of have to always remind myself to, I love change, but then I know so much, and I've seen all that history. I've just seen things, styles change as I've come along. And it could be a small, what these MFA people are doing now, it could be just, you're right, it could be just a small art movement in this 2014 to 2018, and then it could shift again a little bit. It'll be interesting to see what happens with video. Everybody's I don't know, the multimedia, all that. I happen to love old school photography, so of course I'm holding on to it.
Yeah.
But and there's conceptual and conceptual. There's some really wonderful conceptual work out there that still has like a narrative to it that I really love.
Yeah. When I think right now we're all sort of grappling with what the medium is, what it can do, what it can't do, and maybe what it should do. But I think that's really, for me, what I actually find it a very exciting time, because I feel like there is a lot of stuff that's happening, and you see trends that are sort of short-lived. Like there was a thing that seems to be petering out now, where people were calling it new formalism, and some people were just calling it triangle photography, where it was just all of these sort of geometric things, but not really anything other than just the straight aesthetics of it.
Yeah.
It seems to me like that's sort of people are less interested in that now than they were 2 years ago.
Right.
And it only started maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I don't know, but so it is really hard to tell where it's all going. I don't know. But the other thing too is like, I feel like I still see a lot of people who are very interested in more classic styles, and it may not be what's hot in like the New York photo gallery scene, but there is still definitely, one of the great things about the internet is that like these people are still able to find an audience.
Oh, I love that. Are you kidding? When I went to Photolucida, there were a lot of people who were doing these alternative processes and really formal, kind of old school, old style, view camera portraiture and landscapes, and just beautiful, beautiful printing, and that's still very, I think, very alive. And I just love that it pays an homage to the history of photography. Yeah. Like, I'm all for new and experimental work, but I do like I just hope that people, I just like to respect the history.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I find that, that photographers in general, or at least like photographers who are seriously engaging with the medium as an art form, Whether they are coming out of an art school background or not, whether they're completely self-trained, I think that photographers have a really strong connection with history to a greater degree than like when I talk to painters. Like, you know, not to say that painters aren't aware of art history, because that's certainly not true, but I just feel like photography as a medium sort of has a reverence for history to a greater degree than other mediums.
Right. Well, yeah. Just looking, because you can always look back. I mean, you can look at art history of painting and all that. You could see that art history is fascinating when you're looking at painting and sculpture and the other media. But when you look at photography and you see photographs, like, historical events, or just people from the past, or the way, cities used to look. I mean, it's just, then, you respect the history of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like every few months, like, just because I'm constantly looking around at places like FLAC or other, online photography venues, or even just like general social media, like every few months I'll see somebody discover Cartier-Bresson for the first time, or discover like Eggleston for the first time, and and they just completely lose their minds, and and it's one of those things too where I kind of feel like, especially like if like with street photographers, like it's something that I admire street photographers so much, but it's not something I'm like very good at on my own. But I feel like every street photographer ends up going through a Cartier-Bresson phase, before they end up settling. So I don't know. I think that there's definitely still a reverence for, classic styles. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. There should be an Instagram account with, there probably is, history of photography, just showing different, it's like I have this impulse to educate, so that's where that comes from.
Yeah. Do you have like like an art school or background or anything like that?
No, I started really early with the camera when, I was little. When I was really little, my parents had these old magazines that they must have been their parents. I mean, it was just called, I think it was like the Vanity Fair of its day. They were called, I forget what they were called. I'll think of it later. But they had photos in them. They were small pocket-sized magazine publications, and I used to sit in the hallway and look at those magazines because they had beautiful black and white photos of. They were probably Karsh and Stieglitz and that kind of thing, portraits, and that's when I first got interested in photography. And then a couple years later, I got a Kodak, like a Brownie or something, one of those cameras. And I was walking around, taking pictures, and a neighbor woman who happened to be a school teacher saw my interest. She bought me a little paperback on tips about photography. And I loved it. I mean, and then I started to, I dressed up my brother and his, another little kid, and took pictures of them. And then later on, I was in Harvard Square with my friend, and we were doing gravestone rubbings. Do you know what I mean? Like, we found these old graves, and some kid came up to us with a camera, and he said he went to this place called Boston Film Center. I'm from Boston, and this really generous man who, I think he taught at Columbia, but he had this studio in Boston, a big space with dark rooms. And he had, I don't know if he'd gotten a grant or what, but he was teaching kids how to develop and print, and we'd go out together and photograph, and that's where I learned all that. And I think back, it was a guy, and we were all like girls and boys, and I think that wouldn't happen today for lots of, But anyway, it was great. And I ended up going to school because I thought I wanted to be a teacher, and then I ended up just interested in human services in general. But I was always sticking with photography, and so when I moved to New York, I wanted to go to SVA, but they didn't have an MFA at the time. So I just went and signed up for a BFA, even though I already had a degree, college degree. I just wanted to intensely study photography. And there were other people in my class who were like that, college grads who they just wanted to study photography. And that's when I kind of got really good at printing. And I did a couple of years of that. And then I said, it's enough school. I'm going to go out, shoot, do stuff. So, that was really the only training I had. And then a few years ago, I took some courses at ICP just to, and it really was wonderful just to have critique classes, just to, to look at other people's work and to have other people see your own, and they're so valuable. So I've done a lot of those classes as well, and now I just, I have groups that I'm a member of, like Women's Photography Alliance, and we show work to each other, and it's great.
Yeah.
I never really had that formal training, except for the little stint at SVA.
Yeah. I think that those kind of community groups are so valuable.
Oh, yeah.
I belong to one here. And ours is a fairly small group here in San Diego. Just people that we met through different channels, but it's just having the opportunity to get together and see what each other are doing, and
Yep. It's just wonderful, the support and the it's like looking at everybody's work and just getting to know people, and I just love it. I love other photographers and they're being part of that community.
Yeah.
Just love it.
I always find it interesting too, just to hear how people came to, there was a time when I sort of thought that that you would be able to tell whether or not someone had been to art school based on just looking at their photographs. But I think the more and more that I learn about and find and see more photography, I'm not sure that's entirely true. I mean, sometimes you can. Definitely there is a certain, especially if you read people's artist statements, you can kind of tell which ones have been through an MFA program based on that.
Yeah.
And there are a few genres where people are sort of more like that. But in general, I don't know. There's just so many people working in so many ways that sometimes it surprises you. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree, because I've looked up the people whose work I've liked, and then I read about them, and they're self-taught. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the MFA grads, you could they're very, very polished. Mm-hmm. Right, their presentations are polished, and I've sort of been able to tell about that. But, as we go on, that's, currently, I do see photographers out there who are self-taught, and they're very, very, very good, and you can't really tell the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A few years ago, I was thinking, I want to, just for, it could be really fun to get my MFA. I would like to just get so deeply immersed into it, and move my process forward and all that. But, I just can't afford it. Yeah. And then I just sort of said, well, whatever, that would have been nice, but it's okay.
So the last question that I ask everyone, I try to ask, is whether there is any piece of art or literature or just creativity in general that you've experienced recently that meant something to you.
Oh. All right, hold on. I didn't think about that at all.
I just always spring this question on people.
Yeah, I know, and I should have known that. Thought about it. Okay. Well, I love to read. There's definitely some books I've read that recently that I really loved. There was a book that I read not that long ago about, it's called All Who Go Do Not Return. And it's by somebody named Shulem Dean. And he was raised in this seriously right-wing Hasidic, Jewish Hasidic community. And in an arranged marriage and didn't learn English for a long. Although he learned English when he was little, and then his parents got into even more extreme right wing. So he was a little bit lucky in that. But basically, he was in a community that was very, very strict, and he was in an arranged marriage, I think, at the age of 18, and didn't love his wife, but it was too bad. And they had, I think, 3 children. And then he started to like venture out into the world, like sneak, looking at a computer and all that kind of thing. And he tried to get a job because, they sort of kept in poverty, these communities, a lot of them, because they're not employable. And there's a lot of issues about it. But anyway, he was in this closed community, and he kind of rebelled. And he was sort of asked to leave. So he left. So now he lives in Brooklyn, and he's a writer. He wrote this wonderful book that really was just, I just thought it was just so beautifully written and heartfelt, and that I started volunteering at a place called Footsteps, which it's an organization that helps these people, mostly kids, I guess, people in their 20s, who have grown up in these strict environments, religious strict environments, and they've been really sequestered. And so they Footsteps helps them get their GEDs, helps them find housing, takes them to Thanksgiving, gets them invited to Thanksgiving dinners, and like things that they've never had or been exposed to. And a lot of them are artists. So I've since, now my volunteering is I kind of mentor some of the artists who have found Footsteps, who are able to express themselves now, their feelings about how they fit into the world. So that kind of started a whole thing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I have a couple of photographers, and I have one artist who's like she's a street artist and a studio artist who, I consider her a friend now. And, it's just nice to see people just sort of come out of their shell and just, they know that there's something that is driving them, and it's not going to be satisfied in their community. So I say that book really influenced in that way.
All right. Well, thank you. Great. Okay. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. Thank you so much.
This was great. I enjoyed talking with you as well.
Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned at the top of the show, Susan has work in a group exhibition at the Soho Photo Gallery opening tomorrow, July 6th, with a reception from 6 to 8 p.m. The show runs through Saturday, July 22nd, and there is a link in the show notes for that, so please do check it out if you're in the New York area. And that is our show. Thanks so much, as always, for tuning in. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can send me an email at podcast@keepthechannelopen.com. You can also follow me in the show on Twitter at ChannelOpenPod or on Facebook at facebook.com/keepthechanneleopen. If you'd like to help support the show, please sign up as a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/sakeriver. That's patreon.com/sakeriver. Sake like the drink and river like river. And your donations are what keep this show going, and a donation in any amount is greatly appreciated. You can also leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That's a great way to help new listeners find the show, and there's a link in the show notes for that as well. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can find more of his music available for licensing at soundofpicture.com. Next time, our guest will be Scott B. Davis, photographer and founder of the Medium Festival of Photography, so be sure to come back for that. Until then, remember, keep the channel open.